If you go through the front door and look to the right, you'll see an upright piano and an old radiator that needs to be repainted. And in between those, there's a wicker basket. Next to the wicker basket is an auto harp and a guitar that's out of tune. But in this wicker basket, it was just overflowing with slide whistles, castanets, kazoos, thumb cymbals, recorders, drumsticks, those party noisemakers that you'd go like this, make noise with, and then those other things. I always mispronounce them. Are they clavicles? I get them confused with these things here, but you know what I mean, those things. And that we called the music alcove in the house where I grew up. That wicker box was, to me, a symbol of wonderful, loud fun and celebration. That sounds like the perfect recipe for celebration and boisterous youth, don't you think? Well, except for the fact that in addition to being New Englanders, we were also German Lutherans. Think Garrison Keillor, who once described the beloved Lutherans in musical terms. Guess what musical instrument he thought best represented the Lutherans? Tuba. Even better. The triangle. Modest, unobtrusive, not upsetting to anyone, not showy, not ostentatious. And in this music box, there was, in fact, also a triangle. Now, this led to a peculiar kind of education where I was taught to make noise and to be quiet at the same time. This happened not only when I was making too much noise around the house, but in church as well. Church was a place where I had to sit and keep quiet. Sure, adults sang a couple hymns and there was an organ, but sometimes it felt like they might as well have been playing the triangle. If I think about it, I don't think I ever really learned to celebrate or have that kind of physical expressivity that we heard so delightfully in the reading about the robin. You know, can you imagine stomping around like a bird, pretending it's a matador? I don't know where did you learn how to celebrate? There certainly weren't any classes in it that I remember. And through the years, there were things that I've learned and maybe had to unlearn along the way. You know, to think of it, I think through the years, I wasn't so much taught to celebrate, but to cerebrate. Yeah, for those, you know, you can look it up, it really is a word. You know, cerebrate, you know, it means to think or to cogitate. And we good Unitarian Universalists are quite good at cerebrating. Perhaps especially in a university town like Ann Arbor, we may feel like we're especially good at cerebrating. But are we good at celebrating? Now, I know that some of you can shake it like a Polaroid picture. But then there's other of us that struggle with it. And I sometimes feel a little bit like I should be embodying this rather than just talking about it. Like if I could do like the Running Man or the robot Running Man. I don't know how that would work. Whatever it is, it's not good. And what I realize in doing this is that I have poor role models in celebrating and that embodiment of pleasure and joy in the world, that the models I grew up with was more confined. Like, you should have fun, but you should do it in very clear, mediated ways. So what I was left with was, as a kid, being torn between when church would use the liturgical language of celebration, which was pretty solemn, versus the only other reference I knew at the time was that Kool and the Gang song. You remember that? Celebrate good times, come on. So you get glimpses of it at birthday parties, but at church, it felt so conflicting because we'd use the word celebrate, but it didn't seem like there was any celebration going on. Now, part of the problem might actually be that the etymology of celebration has nothing to do with partying so much as to frequent in great numbers, to assemble to honor. In that regards, celebrating Mass or celebrating a religious ceremony has that sense of gathering and solemn honoring of something. But can it also be maybe a little fun? We could try. Because the second definition of celebrating is all about Kool and the Gang. It's fun and festive, it's enthusiastic, it's honest and unprotected, it's party time. And each of these two meanings of the word operates independently. You can have ceremonies without fun, and you can have fun without great numbers, but when these two things come together, what a glorious thing that can be. How often do we see it in our services? We see nods. This is a happening congregation, but I kind of wish if I grew up here, I might have been a different person too. There's truth in that. So kudos to your congregation, because as a denomination and as a culture in general, there are a lot of socioeconomic factors and other different ways where we're taught to make noise and be quiet at the same time, to have pleasure but don't feel good about yourself at the same time, or different ways in which it feels good and doesn't feel good at the same time. And there are certainly good ways of putting guardrails on so that we're not harming other people and that we're being transparent and honest and in line with our own values. But I still think there's ways to leverage that where we still get to experience more joy and pleasure along the way. And in every world religion, you see sort of different impulses within the structure where you'll have movements within, whether it's Catholicism or Islam, that there'll be both ecstatic traditions and ascetic traditions where there are moments for fasting, for penitence, for not living it up. But then there are these other moments where you get lost, where you are physically connected, where you lose that sense of separation of self from others, and all of those, there's a time and place for everything. Right now we are in the season of Lent, where a lot of people are giving things up. Anybody here giving anything up for Lent? Do you mind if I put you on the spot? What are you giving up? Okay, she does mind. That's honest. I appreciate that. I gave up coffee for a day and a half. In base 8, that works out. The math works out. No, it doesn't work out. But giving things up, I think, makes a lot of sense when one is otherwise in a way of living where one is already experiencing the fullness of life. That to take a pause and to give something up is a great way of anchoring and centering in the midst of that. However, if you are feeling like you might be in a place where you feel restricted or aren't thriving and aren't experiencing the physical joys of being alive in the world, it's possible that the spiritual challenge for this time of year, too, as a different kind of Lenten practice, would be, instead of giving things up, of living into more pleasure. And what would that look like? Because that would also be a shift in our religious lives. But it's hard because we've been told so often that pleasure is bad in different ways. It could be dangerous. It can be self-indulgent. It's fleeting. It detracts us from more important things. It can be associated with excesses, with sin, with irresponsibility. We're taught that too much of it makes us weak or dependent or hedonist or valuing pleasure more than the things we really care about. Sometimes that sets up a kind of false dichotomy where if one cares about the happiness of others, you should give up your own happiness and put all of your efforts into creating more enjoyment for other people who don't have it as good. But it can set us up too, because there's different energies that can motivate us in life. Sometimes anger can be very motivating. Sometimes compassion can be very motivating. Sometimes the feel-goods can be really motivating. And so when we think of the story for all ages, of the different things that feel good in life, helping others feels good. Caring about justice, signing petition letters, acting in accordance with our core values, that feels good. Like it should. We should be able to feel that in our bodies when we're doing good work, that should feel good rather than be another obligation that we do with some kind of, when ourselves are not fully integrated, we can carry things that knot us up rather than let us be fully expressed. There are so many things that can keep us from enjoying life, and among them is a natural trauma response as well, where there's sometimes a sense of lack of safety in order to just be who you are and to experience the joys of life. That there can be dulling effects from that we don't always think that we deserve it either sometimes. Now there's differences for sure in how we might think about re-engaging pleasure even as a religious discipline. One example is in the writings of Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote a book called Pleasure Activism. And she writes, "Pleasure is not one of the spoils of capitalism. It is what our bodies, our human systems, are structured for. It is the aliveness and awakening, the gratitude and humility, the joy and celebration of being miraculous," end quote. We were made for pleasure, not reckless, mindless consumption, but the kind of deep, nourishing joy that reminds us we are alive, the kind of pleasure that reconnects us with our own bodies, with one another, and with the earth. When we strip pleasure from our lives, we do not become more virtuous. We become more numb, more disconnected, more resigned to systems that tell us to work harder, to push through, to ignore the ache in our muscles, the hunger in our bellies, the longing in our souls. How do we reclaim that? I think some of what we can turn to is the readings that we heard earlier. The first poem that was He Vows by Konstantin Cavafy is talking about longings that we might have, that one might feel like a twinge of like needing to have it in the night or not having it out in the open. And so the difference between that versus the second reading, which was about the robin stomping around. But another thing that's just a true thing of beauty and gave me goosebumps when hearing the music is that the background music to that first poem was written by our very own Dusty. And Dusty wrote this piece as an a cappella piece with those words being sung with that music, and it had its first premiere in New York City last weekend. And that's another example where, like, not only the music gives me goosebumps and joy, but the community that helps, support this and integrate this is pleasurable and is a good part of the work that we do together. And as that second reading said with the robin stomping around, I was actually thinking, like, where do I experience pleasure in the world these days? And so this was the most fun service prep I've had in a while, because part of my homework, read a few books, check, I was reading the Greek hedonism schools and different things, like you can thank me later for not referencing those. But part of where my energy went was saying, like, where do I experience joy and physical pleasure? Like, where do I feel guilty about it? Where do I feel easy about it? So on my homework list, I was like, go to a nice restaurant, have some nice food. I felt guilty. I enjoyed the food, but I also felt like part of me felt like it was irresponsible to go out to eat when I should be cooking at home. I got up at 3 in the morning, or what was it, 2:15 to see the lunar eclipse. Did anybody else wake up in the middle of the night, the lunar eclipse? It was a brisk night. I remember feeling the crispness of the air in the middle of the night and just being part of a miracle where, like, the moon turns red, and that so strange. Like, we live in a strange world. And to see that and be reminded of that is also enlivening. I saw another robin in the field wrestling with a worm that I swear looked larger than the robin was, but it was all in. It was like gorging and eating and just like unabashedly living out loud in a way that I don't think I'm capable of. But I'm like taking notes of like what would that look like to really just be all in, or to sing with gusto when I don't sing well, or to do the things, but to be fully expressed is terrifying. But how freeing that would be. Are there any joys in your life that you feel like you feel like you're toning it down because other people want you to, where you can't fully be expressed? Because that's sort of part of my challenge here for this Lenten season as like an alternate practice. If we don't want to give things up, maybe we could ask that question of where do we find pleasure? How can we do more of it to be more fully alive and engaged and connected to others along the way? And so I invite you today to love the fleshy parts of your body, to listen to them, to honor them, to taste something sweet without guilt, to move your body not for punishment but for joy, to embrace delight as sacred. Let us be people who do not just cerebrate but celebrate, who do not just think about joy but live it, who do not just observe pleasure from a distance but step fully into it, because this life is not meant to be endured. It is meant to be lived through, experienced, and celebrated. May we make it so. Amen.